The air raid siren wailed through the small French village of Saint-Étienne, piercing the September night. Rachel Armstrong's hands trembled as she guided wounded soldiers into the makeshift hospital basement. 3 years as a Red Cross nurse had hardened her to the sight of blood, but never to the sound of the bombers. "Get those lights out," she shouted, her voice steady despite her fear. The remaining bulbs were extinguished, plunging them into darkness broken only by nurses' flashlights, pointed downward. Rachel moved among the wounded with practiced efficiency. American, British, and even German soldiers lay side by side, war's cruelest democracy. She'd learned to see them not as nations but as broken bodies requiring her skill. What she couldn't allow herself to see was their humanity. In 1943 occupied France, attachment was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Miss Armstrong," called Sister Bernadette from across the room, "the German needs morphine." Rachel nodded, retrieving a precious vial from their dwindling supplies. The German officer had been brought in 2 days ago, half dead from a resistance ambush. His uniform had been removed and hidden. If SS patrols discovered Allied medical personnel treating a Wehrmacht officer without reporting him, everyone would face a firing squad. As Rachel administered the morphine, the German's eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue against his ashen face. "Dank," he whispered. "Don't speak," she said flatly in German. "Save your strength." This was her war, small mercies administered without emotion. Compassion without connection. Duty without attachment. The world had gone mad, and the only way to survive was to seal her heart away from everything except her work. Love was a peacetime luxury, and peace seemed a distant memory. That night, as the all-clear sounded and Rachel finally slept in the nurses' quarters, she dreamed of Boston, of medical school interrupted, of the life she'd abandoned to serve in this war. Sometimes she wondered if she'd made the right choice, if any choice could be right in a world torn apart. Morning arrived with the sound of trucks. Rachel glanced out the window to see SS officers disembarking in the village square. "Inspection," Sister Bernadette whispered. "God help us." Rachel hurried to the basement. The German officer was still there, feverish but alive. His dog tags read Stefan Dietrich, Hauptmann. A captain. Valuable to both sides. "We need to move him," she whispered to Dr. Laurent, the elderly local physician who ran their covert operation. "Where?" he asked. "The Germans are searching every building." Rachel made a decision that would alter everything. "My room." "They won't search the nurses' quarters as thoroughly. It violates their sense of propriety." With the help of an orderly, they carried Captain Dietrich up the back stairs while the hospital administrator stalled the SS at the front entrance. Rachel's room was barely large enough for her narrow bed and a small dresser, but they managed to hide him beneath the bed, covering the space with a long bedspread. She sat on her bed, heart pounding, as boots echoed down the hallway. A sharp knock, then the door opened without waiting for her answer. An SS officer stood framed in the doorway. "Fräulein, this building is under inspection," he said in accented English. Rachel stood, summoning her most professional demeanor. "Of course, sir. I'm an American Red Cross nurse. My papers." She handed him her identification. The officer examined them carefully, then glanced around the room. "America," he said with disdain. "Your country should have stayed out of European affairs." "I'm here to treat the wounded, regardless of nationality," she answered, the practiced response of thousands of Red Cross workers. He handed back her papers and gave the room one last suspicious look before departing. Rachel waited until his footsteps faded before dropping to her knees beside the bed. "They're gone," she whispered. Stefan's eyes were open, watching her. "Why did you hide me?" he asked in perfect English. "I am your enemy." Rachel was startled by both his language skills and his question. "You're my patient," she corrected. That's all that matters in this room. It was what she believed, or what she told herself she believed. Patients, not people. Bodies, not souls. The war had taught her that attachment led to heartbreak, and in a world where each day might be her last, Rachel Armstrong couldn't risk her heart. But as days passed and Stefan slowly recovered in her small room, she'd taken to sleeping in an empty supply closet, something began to change. Each night, after her shift, she would check his wounds, bring him food, and inevitably, they would talk. Stefan had been a professor of English literature at Heidelberg before the war. Drafted, he explained one evening. "I never believed in Hitler's madness, but what choice did ordinary Germans have?" "There's always a choice," Rachel said, though she wondered if that were true. He smiled sadly. "Like your choice to treat enemy soldiers. That's different. It's my duty as a nurse. And mine as an officer was to follow orders." He looked away. "Until I couldn't anymore." Rachel paused in changing his bandage. "What do you mean?" "I was ordered to oversee the deportation of Jewish families from a village near Lyon." His voice grew quiet. "Instead, I warned them. Helped several families escape to Switzerland. Someone in my unit reported me. I was being transported for court-martial when resistance fighters attacked our convoy." Rachel sat back, studying him. Everything she'd been taught about the enemy, everything she believed, shifted slightly, like earth trembling before a landslide. "If they find you, I'll be executed as a traitor," he finished simply. That night, Rachel wrote in her journal for the first time in months. "I have been treating the enemy as if they were not human. It was easier that way. But what if that belief, the very thing keeping me sane in this insanity, is wrong?" October brought colder weather and more wounded as Allied forces pushed toward German lines. Rachel worked 18-hour shifts, returning to her room exhausted, yet she found herself looking forward to those quiet hours with Stefan. One night, as air raid sirens wailed again, she found him standing at her window, looking out at the flashing sky. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded, closing the blackout curtains. "I couldn't bear lying there, listening to the bombs, wondering which of my countrymen were dying, which of yours." He turned to her, his face illuminated by a flash of anti-aircraft fire through the curtain seam. "This war has made enemies of people who should never have met across battlefields." Rachel felt something inside her crumble. How would we have met, then? In some peaceful world? Perhaps I would have been giving a lecture at Harvard. You would have attended, disagreed with my interpretation of Whitman, and approached me afterward to argue your point. The image was so vivid, so painfully impossible, that Rachel laughed despite herself. I would never have been so bold. I think you would. His hand reached for hers in the darkness. I think you are the bravest person I've ever known. Her fingers intertwined with his before she could think better of it. They stood that way, hand in hand in the darkness, as bombs fell and the world burned around them. The next morning, Rachel woke to find an envelope on her pillow. Inside was a letter written on the back of a hospital form. "My dearest Rachel, in a world determined to divide us into enemies, you have shown me what humanity truly means. I have watched you tend to the wounded without asking which flag they serve, seen your hands heal what weapons have torn apart. If there is hope for this broken world, it lives in hearts like yours. I fear what tomorrow brings, but today, I need you to know that amidst this darkness, you have become my light. Yours." Stefan. Rachel pressed the letter to her heart, terrified by what it meant, by what she felt. She had built walls around her heart, convinced that love was impossible in wartime, that duty required detachment. Now those walls were crumbling, and she didn't know whether to rebuild them or let them fall. That evening, she made a decision. She approached Dr. Laurent with a plan to get Stefan to Switzerland. The resistance has a network, she explained. They could help him cross the border. Dr. Laurent studied her face carefully. This is not just about saving a patient, is it? Rachel couldn't answer. My dear, of all the dangerous things in this war, love may be the most perilous. I never said anything about you didn't have to. He sighed heavily. I will contact them. But Rachel, be prepared. The chances of success. She nodded, understanding the unfinished thought. 2 nights later, Rachel sat with Stefan in her room, explaining the plan. Tomorrow night, resistance members will come with papers and civilian clothes. They'll take you through back roads toward the Swiss border. And you? He asked, his eyes searching hers. I stay here. My work isn't finished. He took her hands. Come with me. The war is lost for Germany. The Americans will be here soon. I can't abandon my post. These people need me. She couldn't meet his eyes. When the war ends. When the war ends, he repeated. Will you look for me then? Yes, she whispered, the promise escaping before she could reconsider. Stefan pulled her closer, one hand gently tilting her face up. His kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a demand. Rachel answered by leaning into him, allowing herself, just for this moment, to forget the war, their nationalities, everything but the feeling of being held. Morning came too quickly. Rachel had duty at the hospital, and as she prepared to leave, Stefan pressed another letter into her hand. For when I'm gone, he said. She tucked it into her pocket without reading it, unable to face the goodbye it contained. That day, as Rachel tended the wounded, air raid sirens blared again. But this time, it wasn't just air raids. The front was moving. German troops were retreating through the village, followed closely by advancing Allied forces. Rachel rushed back to her quarters, only to find them empty. Stefan was gone. On her bed lay a note from Dr. Laurent, plan changed. Had to move him now. God be with you both. Before she could absorb this news, the world exploded. A shell hit the hospital wing, and Rachel was thrown against the wall. When she regained consciousness, smoke filled the corridor, and flames licked at the wooden beams. She struggled to her feet, helping evacuate patients as the battle raged around the village. Hours later, when American troops secured the area, Rachel sat on a pile of rubble, her uniform covered in soot and blood, Stefan's unread letter lost in the chaos. That night, as Rachel helped establish a new aid station in the village church, an American intelligence officer approached her. Nurse Armstrong? I'm Major Phillips. We need to speak privately. Her heart froze. Had they discovered her harboring an enemy officer? In the church vestry, the major didn't waste time. We've intercepted communications about a German officer accused of treason, one Captain Stefan Dietrich. Intelligence suggests he was hidden in this village. Do you know anything about this? Rachel straightened her spine. Sir, as a Red Cross nurse, I treat whoever needs medical attention without regard to Nurse Armstrong, he interrupted. This isn't an accusation. Captain Dietrich has been providing intelligence to Allied forces for months. He's a valuable asset. If he's alive, we need to find him before the retreating German forces do. The revelation staggered her. Stefan hadn't just defied one order, he had been actively working against the Nazi regime. He was here, she admitted. Resistance members were taking him to Switzerland yesterday. Major Phillips nodded. We'll contact our people. Thank you, nurse. For weeks, as the Allies pushed toward Germany, Rachel heard nothing. She continued her work, moving with the medical units, keeping her eyes open for any news, any sign. The unread letter haunted her, his final words, lost in the chaos of war. In December 1944, as snow blanketed the French countryside, Rachel was transferred to a field hospital near the German border. The Battle of the Bulge was raging, and casualties overwhelmed them. On Christmas Eve, working through the night, she barely registered a commotion at the entrance until someone called her name. "Nurse Armstrong. Message for you." The runner handed her a crumpled envelope. Inside was a brief note from Major Phillips, Dietrich safe in Allied custody. Debriefing in London. He asked about you. Rachel pressed the note to her chest, eyes closed in silent thanksgiving. He was alive. Safe. But the war continued. Germany did not surrender until May 1945, and even then, Rachel's work wasn't done. The wounded still needed care. Displaced persons still needed help returning home. It wasn't until August that she finally boarded a ship back to America, having received no further word about Stefan. Back in Boston, Rachel tried to rebuild her life. She returned to medical school, haunted by what she'd seen but determined to use those experiences to become a better doctor. She wrote to Major Phillips and other contacts, seeking information about Stefan, but responses were vague or non-existent. Europe was in chaos, records scattered, millions displaced. Years passed. Rachel completed medical school, established a practice, built a life. But she never married. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she would remember those few weeks in her small room in Saint-Étienne, the conversations, the touch of his hand, and wonder. In 1985, Rachel, now Dr. Armstrong, retired from her medical practice. At 70, her red hair had faded to silver, but she remained active, volunteering at veterans' hospitals, speaking to medical students about wartime medicine. That spring, she received a letter from France. The village of Saint-Étienne was dedicating a memorial to those who had operated the secret hospital during the occupation. Would she attend? The journey felt like traveling backward in time. The village had been rebuilt, but Rachel could still see the ghosts of what had been. The ceremony was moving, speeches, a plaque unveiled on the rebuilt hospital, now a community center. Afterward, an elderly French woman approached her. "Dr. Armstrong? I am Marie Laurent, Dr. Laurent's daughter." Rachel embraced her. "Your father was a hero. He spoke of you often," Marie said. "Before he died, he asked me to give you something, if you ever returned." She handed Rachel a small, age-yellowed envelope. With trembling fingers, Rachel opened it. Inside was a letter, carefully preserved for 40 years. "My beloved Rachel, if you are reading this, we have been separated by circumstances beyond our control. I am leaving with the resistance tonight, and though I pray for our reunion, I must prepare for the possibility that fate has other plans. Before the war, I believed that duty was everything. That personal happiness must be sacrificed for greater causes. You taught me that love is not separate from duty but its very foundation. That in loving one person completely, we learn to love humanity itself. If Providence allows, I will find you when this madness ends. If not, know that for a few precious weeks, you gave me a glimpse of what life could be, should be, when we finally lay down our weapons and recognize each other not as enemies but as fellow travelers on this earth. Whatever happens, I will love you until my final breath. Forever yours." Stefan. Rachel's hand shook. "Marie, did your father ever say what happened to him?" "To Stefan?" Marie nodded. "Papa helped many people during the war. He kept records of everyone, where they went, who helped them. Captain Dietrich reached Switzerland. After that, she hesitated. Papa said he continued working with Allied intelligence. His family in Germany suffered for his choices. Do you know if he survived the war? Papa believed so. But Europe was chaos afterward. So many displaced, so many records destroyed. That night, in her hotel room, Rachel couldn't sleep. 40 years of wondering, and now this letter, his words, preserved across time, reigniting questions she'd learned to live without answers to. The next morning, she decided to visit the old hospital grounds one last time before returning to America. The community center was quiet, a few elderly people playing cards in what had once been the main ward. Rachel wandered through the building, memories surfacing with each step. She found herself in a corridor that had once led to the nurses' quarters. Though rebuilt, it still felt familiar. She stopped, overwhelmed by emotion, leaning against the wall where her tiny room had once been. They tell me this was where a brave American nurse hid a German traitor. The voice, aged but unmistakable in its cadence, came from behind her. Rachel froze, afraid to turn, afraid to hope. They say she saved his life, at great risk to her own. Slowly, Rachel turned. An elderly man stood there, leaning on a cane. His hair was white, his face lined with age, but his eyes, those startlingly blue eyes, were unchanged. "Stefan," she whispered. He smiled, the same smile that had broken through her carefully constructed walls all those years ago. "I never stopped looking for you, Rachel. Every year, I wrote to hospitals in Boston, to medical associations. But you had changed your name professionally, hadn't you?" "My mother's maiden name," she said, her voice barely audible. After the war, there was still prejudice against German names. "Dr. Rachel Williams," he nodded. "I found you in a medical journal last year. By then, I was retired from the university, living in Geneva. When I saw the announcement about this memorial, you hoped I might come. I knew you would." He moved closer, studying her face. "I have rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, imagining what I would say if I ever found you again." Rachel's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "And what did you decide?" "That words are insufficient." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn leather case. "I bought this in 1945, as soon as I was free. I've carried it ever since, waiting." He opened the case. Inside was a simple gold ring. "In the darkest moments of human history, you showed me that light cannot be extinguished," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you for 40 years, Rachel Armstrong." "If you can forgive the decades lost," Rachel placed her fingers against his lips, stopping his words. "There is nothing to forgive. We both did what we had to do." "Then is it too late? Are we too old to begin?" She laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed in the corridor. "We began 40 years ago, Stefan Dietrich. We just had a very long intermission." His hands, weathered by time but still strong, took hers. "Then, Rachel Armstrong, will you marry a former enemy alien?" "No," she said, her eyes shining. "I will marry the man who taught me that love is not a luxury but a necessity. Even in war. Especially in war." When they kissed, it was not with the desperate passion of youth, but with the profound gratitude of souls who, against all odds, had been granted a second chance. 3 months later, they married in a small ceremony in Geneva. Among their wedding gifts was a package from Marie Laurent, a collection of letters Stefan had sent to Dr. Laurent after reaching Switzerland, each one asking about Rachel, each one declaring his love and his determination to find her when the war ended. In their twilight years, Rachel and Stefan traveled together, spoke at universities about reconciliation and healing, and wrote a joint memoir about finding love across enemy lines. But their greatest joy was in the simple moments, morning coffee on their balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, reading to each other from favorite books, holding hands as they walked through parks blooming with the promise of spring. "Do you ever regret it?" Stefan asked her once. "The years we lost." Rachel considered this, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "No," she said finally. "Those years shaped us into people who can fully appreciate what we have now. And we have now, that's what matters." Stefan squeezed her hand. "My wise American nurse. Still healing after all these years." "Some wounds," she said softly, "are finally healed by time itself." They had 10 years together, 10 years that contained enough love for a lifetime. And when Rachel died in her sleep at 83, Stefan placed their letters, from wartime and after, in a cedar box, which he entrusted to Marie's granddaughter with instructions that they be donated to a war memorial. "Let them stand as testament," he wrote in his last letter, placed atop the collection. "In humanity's darkest hour, love remained our greatest light."